President Biden is signing 3 executive actions to, quote, modernize the nation's immigration system. The administration says they are the first of a series of actions the president will take to undo hardline immigration policies enacted by former President Trump. The first order creates a task force to reunite families separated at the U.S. border. The second intends to replace former President Trump's Remain in Mexico program, which applies to migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. And the third action requires government agencies to conduct a, quote, top-to-bottom review of recent regulations, policies, and guidance that have set up barriers to our legal immigration system. Despite a campaign promise to stop all deportations of undocumented immigrants for 100 days, the Associated Press reports hundreds have been forced to leave the country since President Biden took office. For more on this, let's bring in Camilo Montoya-Galvez and Franco Ordoñez. Camilo is CBS News immigration reporter, and Franco is a White House correspondent for NPR. Welcome. It's good to see you both. Camilo, let me start with you. Tell us more about today's executive actions and when we will actually start to see these changes to the immigration system take place.
Hi, good afternoon, Elaine. We expect President Biden to sign 3 executive orders on immigration today. One of those orders, Elaine, will create this much-awaited government task force to locate and reunite migrant families who were separated along the U.S.-Mexico border during the Trump administration's zero-tolerance border crackdown in 2018 and 2017. The task force will be led by now DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and it will also include the Department of State and the Department of Health and Human Services. The task force will also examine on a case-by-case basis, Elaine, whether any of these families are eligible for certain immigration benefits that will enable their reunification. A second executive order will mandate a review of several Trump-era asylum policies, including the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, Elaine, which has required more than 70,000 asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their U.S. court hearings. And a third order will require a broad review of several restrictions that the Trump administration made to the legal immigration system, including the so-called public charge rules, which gave U.S. officials more power to deny green cards and visas from immigrants the government determined could rely on public benefits like food stamps in the future.
Franco, on reunification, what are some of the challenges of reuniting families separated at the U.S. border? And remind us how the Trump administration sought to justify these separations.
Well, Camilo kind of talked about a little bit about it, the zero-tolerance policies that the Trump administration enacted. The argument that the Trump administration made at that time, led by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who was behind much of this, was that those people who come over the border illegally must understand that they can face penalties, including deportation of children and, of course, separation of families. That was supposed to be a punishment for these families and try to reason for them not to bring their children. That obviously didn't work. For months, there was a major outcry as hundreds, thousands of children were separated from their parents. We're seeing the images now on the screen. It was such an outpouring of things. It was probably one of the greatest events that really had an impact on the midterm elections, actually. Many people pointed to that. And so there are still, years later, there are still hundreds of children who have not been reunited with their parents. There were thousands of children separated from their parents, and many of those parents were deported back to their home countries, and they are still missing. They still have not located these families. It's in the hundreds. And it's a kind of thing where these families, these records, these addresses are not in some file cabinet that they can go to. Good records were not kept, which is why they need this task force to kind of go and look for these records. And the truth is, the administration doesn't know exactly how many children there are or who all are the parents. And that is going to take a lot of work.
And as CBS News has reported, and Camilo, I know you've reported, there is tremendous psychological and developmental damage in the wake of this when it comes to those children who were separated from their parent. And that is likely going to last for years as these children try to grapple with what has taken place. Camilo, I want to ask you about what we mentioned in the intro. What is it that we know about the deportations and expulsions that have been taking place in the beginning of President Biden's term?
Well, that's a great question, Elaine, because during President Biden's first day in office, the Department of Homeland Security announced an unprecedented 100-day moratorium on most deportations from the interior of the U.S. This was not a categorical ban on all deportations, but it covered most immigrants facing deportation who had arrived in the U.S. before November of 2020. So it did not cover those migrants who have been recently apprehended at the border. But only 5 days after that moratorium was instituted, a federal judge in Texas suspended it while he reviewed a lawsuit filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who argued that the deportation moratorium was not only illegal because it violated, in his opinion, immigration law, but that it also violated an agreement that the state Texas brokered with the Trump administration, which purports to require the Department of Homeland Security to give Texas prior notice before implementing most changes to immigration policy. So I think this case in Texas, Elaine, is going to be a preview of what's to come when it comes to Mr. Biden's immigration policies. I think we can expect many of them to be challenged by conservative states like Texas. The Arizona Attorney General has also threatened to sue over these deportation policies. So I think we can expect a lot more of this in the coming weeks.
Well, Franco, what has the response been from immigration activists and progressives who are watching to see how President Biden will diverge from the policies of former President Obama, who some dubbed the quote-unquote deporter-in-chief?
Yeah, it was that time, under Obama that really had a great impact on many of these immigration activists. Former President Obama did not fulfill his promise to introduce immigration legislation, a comprehensive package, in his first year in office. And that is something that immigration activists have not forgotten. They have told me repeatedly that is something they think about, and that is why they plan to keep the pressure on the Biden administration to not only fulfill his promises, but actually to do more, because they feel he needs to do more, considering all the actions that the Trump administration did and the steps that were taken to really make life just more and more increasingly difficult for those here, the 11 million people undocumented. There are a lot of issues, a lot of priorities right now that Biden has to deal with. COVID-19, climate change, racial equity, serious matters. But the immigration activists want to make sure that immigration is there as well and it's not lost in the shuffle.
We know you'll both continue to watch it. Camilo Montoya-Galvez and Franco Ordoñez, thank you. Great to have you both.
Thank you.